Hi, I'm Jessica with Ellie and Mac, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this kind of fancy round bag. It has some unique details. This bag is slightly more complicated than our last bag. If you sewed this bag up with me last week, this one is a little bit easier than this one. So if you're not quite ready for the intermediate bag, you can go back and grab the Callie Casual Sling Bag pattern and sew that one up with me first, and then move on to this bag. This bag has some slightly more complicated techniques. We have piping around the seam here. We have hidden strap connectors. And just the fact that it's round means that you're always going in a circle and you're turning on your sewing machine, which is just a little bit more difficult. If you do want to make this project slightly simpler, slightly less intermediate, you could not use the piping here in the seam. It will give a slightly different look. But that does add a lot of difficulty to the bag as you're going around the gusset. Anyway, enough about that. Let's get started and I'll go show you all the pieces that we need to have cut out at the beginning. I have all my pieces cut and interfaced, so I'm just going to quickly walk you through a few things. You can, of course, find all of these pieces in the instructions. All of them are listed out, how much you need to cut. And so we're just going to briefly go over this. Here you can see my zippers with the zipper pull, one each, and 2 D-rings, 2 rivets. If you don't have rivets, you can use the sewing machine for this part, but rivets are better. You need a strap. Either you can use a chain strap or you can cut out the strap from the pattern file. You'll need either binding or fold over elastic. This is fold over elastic, also known as FOE. Here's the gusset, and then you have the hidden strap connector pieces. This is your main piece, and this is the facing piece, and the pocket. And of course, over there you have the 3 main lining pieces, the 2 front pieces, and then this is Decovil Heavy. You do need this, it's very important, so make sure you use Decovil Heavy for your bag for these pieces. And I'll show you just a minute what we're going to do with those. So we're not going to interface anything with that yet, except one caveat, except we are going to interface this just on its own. This is the strap connector piece that you'll need later. As you can see, I have the main pieces here cut out, and what you don't see is what's underneath, and I'll go ahead and remove this for now. I had them centered, but we can recenter that easily. You need some foam for the back of this. This is so that we can quilt this. If you don't want to quilt your bag, you don't have to use the foam. You can just put the Decovil Heavy on there. But if we want to quilt, we're going to use this. This is fusible foam, which works really well because you can easily put it in there out of the seam allowance and then quilt across it, and it's not going to move around. But if you don't have this, you can use regular foam as long as it's the correct width. You just don't want anything too thick or too thin. Ideally, you want 2 to 3 millimeters in width. And if you need to use a couple layers of batting instead of the foam, you can also do that in substitution. So you need that for this piece and also for the 2 front pieces. And if you'd also like to quilt your gussets, you can do that as well. Just a quick note, before you start sewing this, I'm going to show you some feet that might be helpful in your journey of sewing this bag. This is, like I said, a little bit more difficult bag. So having the right feet or the right foot for what you're doing in that moment is really going to make a difference. So I'm going to go put these on a background so you can see them, and we'll have a quick chat about them. Quickly, here are some feet that you might find useful. So this is a walking foot. Yours might look a little different than this, but essentially they do the same thing and they walk along the fabric, which is really great for top stitching, especially in this bag. These 2 are Teflon feet. You can see the Teflon on the bottom. This one is a regular Teflon foot. It's quite narrow, And this is a Teflon foot with a roller, and it's also hinged. I find both of them useful for different things. This one's really great around curves when you're top stitching on vinyl or anything sticky. This one's really great to go straight while you're top stitching on anything sticky. This is a piping foot, and they have different sizes along the bottom that you shove the piping down in that groove. And then it sews right next to the piping. This was very helpful. And if you don't have a piping foot, you will need this foot for the piping. This is a zipper foot. Yours might look a little different. There's some different models. Mine looks like this, and it's good for piping, of course, also for the zippers. We need this kind of foot or a different kind of zipper foot while we sew this bag up. If you would like to quilt your pieces, there are two templates in the file and then a third option for how to quilt this. So the two templates that are included are a zigzag template and a curved line template, and you can either print that out or project it. And then the third is that you can just do diamond shapes, which is lines that cross over each other in the end. So you can choose whichever option you like, but I'm going to go ahead and just do the lines. That is the easiest one. If you'd like to use the other templates, go for it. And if you want to mark on your vinyl or faux leather, we have a couple of options. If you have a Hera tool that indents the vinyl, that's great. I don't have one, and I've tried a couple of different things I have and haven't gotten that to work. You can also use a tracing wheel. Make sure you test it out on fabric first. I did test it, and it's like almost like it disappears too fast. Like I can kind of see the lines, but that is an option. Or you can use a water or air soluble pen like this. This is a Dritz pen, and it has both. And so I'm using the air and water soluble side, which is the purple. Make sure you test it first. So I have tested it, and it comes off really nicely. So that's an option. There are some special liquid chalk pens, which I don't have, but the internet told me are great. So if you have one of those, that's awesome. The last option is to use painter's tape. I really like this one because it makes sure that your lines are straight. You can get painter's tape in a lot of different thicknesses. So I think this one is, it's like 1 3/4 inch. And if you lay this on your fabric, you can just stick it on wherever you'd like to start. You can make sure you're at, 45 degrees or 60 degrees, whatever angle you'd like. And see on my mat here, I have these quarter points lined up with the straight lines, perpendicular lines. And then I can use the markings on here. So this would be a 60 degree. This one is 45 degrees. And that way it's really easy to know where to line it up, or you could use a ruler for this. But essentially, like let's say we want to put it on that 45 degree line. We can place it right on the line like this. And then you can sew across on this side and sew across on this side right next to the tape. You could just put your foot up against it if you have a narrow foot, or however you like to eyeball it. And then after you've sewn those lines, you're just going to pick the tape up and align it with the line that you just sewed all the way across. And that makes it so easy because they're definitely going to come out straight. Just a word of caution is when you do these pieces, make sure that you have them aligned with the top being the top, the bottom being the bottom, the sides, etc. And then when you mark the lines, you want to have them together like this. There's going to be a 1/2 inch gap here after you do all the seam allowance and everything. That's how big the zipper will be. So if you want to measure that, you can as well, just to make sure that the lines on the front of your bag match up. So I would, like, if you're using the template, have it like this and put the template on there as such. And if you're using the tape, like go all the way across the pieces like that and mark them. Or yeah, I would mark them like that. And then if you do one at a time, just like line it up again like this and then do the other one. Just be really careful because you don't want like lines that go one way and then all of a sudden jog the other way. Okay, so I have these two lined up, and I have the quarter points marked up, the quarter points lined up with the lines on my mat, the perpendicular lines. And then I have this ruler here. So I've got it lined up with the 45-degree marking on the mat. And so the line's right here, and underneath the line I'm at 3/4 inch in. That's a lot of measurements. So however you need to figure this out, it seems like there's a lot of different ways you could do it. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark that right there across both pieces. And then you can decide like how far over you're going to go again with that. So we can use the tape, or we can use whatever you want. But I think I'm going to try the tape with this. So if we lay the line of tape across the line we just made, and then we can actually just put a couple pieces and cut in between, and then both the pieces should be aligned. As long as I don't move them while I move my magnets here, huh? Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is just make another line that's the same width as the tape out from the tape. And then I'm going to make another line. And then we can put another piece of tape right along there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go and stitch on both sides of the tape on both of these, and then you can come back and align them again and stitch the opposite way, and then we'll make our diamonds. For the back, I've got these lined up with these lines on my mat, the quarter points this way and this way. And then this line on my mat is 45-degree angles. So I'm just going to lay the ruler right on that 45-degree line and then mark that. And then we can put a piece of tape across the line area. And then on this side, it's easy. All you're going to do is you're going to stitch on this side of the tape and then on this side of the tape, and then we'll just move the tape. So after you've done your stitching line here, you're going to take the tape and put it on the other side of the stitching line so it will sit right here, and then do another line and then move it again, do another line, and then we'll just do it the opposite way at, again, a 45-degree angle so that we make diamonds. Okay, once you have those all stitched, you can remove your tape or wipe your lines off, and then we're just going to do lines perpendicular to the first ones we did, and that will create our diamond shape. If you'd like to remark them or just use the tape as you go along, you can do that. And I'm going to go grab my ruler and make sure this is 100% 90 degrees from the first lines. I'm going to go ahead and stitch along all those new lines, and then we'll have our quilted shape. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to stitch along this side and then that side, and then I'll move the tape. If you're marking your lines in a different way, no worries. Go ahead and do it how you like. And I'm using a stitch length of 3.5, and I've got my presser foot pressure pretty low, and I'm using a hinged rolling foot with Teflon on the bottom. Another good one would be, of course, a walking foot. So try to use the best foot that you have for the fabric and the job that you Okay, I have all my lines stitched the one way, and now we're just going to stitch the perpendicular way so that we can get those diamonds on the back piece. Okay, once you have all of your quilting done on both the back and the front, we're going to add our piece of Decovil. If you haven't cut it, you need to go back and cut one of these. It's very essential to making sure that the bag keeps its shape. And you'll just lay this shiny side down onto the back of your quilted piece. Make sure that you also go do it on pieces A and B. And the gussets if you haven't done that yet and you've quilted them. Okay, once you have the front quilted as you like and you've added your Decovil, which you'll see that I didn't and I had to go at it later, but make sure you add yours. So we're just going to go ahead and separate the zipper and lay them both right sides together with the top clipped to the top and the bottom clipped to the bottom. Okay, once you have these clipped into place, you're just going to baste both sides at about a 1/4 inch to a scant 3/8 inch seam allowance all along both of the edges of the zipper. Okay, once you have that basted on both sides of the zipper, we're going to go ahead and lay our A and B lining right sides together with the main, and the zipper will be sandwiched in between. And after we have that clipped into place, we are going to go ahead and sew all the way across the top. You do need to make sure that the ends match up really well. It does look like it needs to come over just a touch. And then we're going to line that all along here, clip it on. Same with piece B. We're going to make sure that that is right sides together. Okay, and then we're going to go back to the sewing machine, this time for sure with a zipper foot or a very narrow foot, because we're going to sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance all along here and all along here. Especially if you have very thick leather, you can trim the seam allowance right here, but we're not going to trim the zipper. We don't really need to trim the lining. You are just going to trim the actual outer vinyl or leather, whatever you're using. Okay, and then we're going to press really well from both sides. On mine, I'm going to press just the lining from the back with my iron, but not my zipper because it's a nylon coil zipper and it will melt. And then from the front, I'm just going to get that really nicely pressed down, maybe use my roller. And after we get that really nicely pressed on both of these, we are going to top stitch through both the main and lining right here about 1/8 of an inch from the zipper on both pieces A and B. I've switched back to my Teflon rolling foot, and I've also increased my stitch length back to 3.5 so we can top stitch along here. And this is a little bit hard to eyeball depending on what foot you have, so I have made a little bit of a mark with a pen right here on my foot. So if you have a foot that you can kind of mark it, and that way I can see exactly where it needs to be all along. Okay, once you have those both top stitched, we're going to go ahead and add our zipper pull back to the zipper. I have my pull on my zipper jig right here, and you can add your pull however you'd like. If you want to think about which way the zipper opens and closes, generally you want to open the zipper to the right, but that's totally up to you. Okay, once you have the zipper pull on, you can actually pull it all the way through and put it on one more time. That way your zipper will be closed and then the pull can be right in the middle. Both of the zipper sides will be closed and we won't have to worry about those moving while we do our next steps. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and trim all the way around the piece to make sure that everything is aligned. You can see that my liner is sticking out just a little bit, and of course both my zippers are sticking out on both sides. If you'd also like to baste along both zipper ends so that they don't come open, you can do that. So just right here, and that way when we go around with our seam allowance, everything will be even. You caught this, that if you notice that I didn't have the Decovil on when we put these two pieces together, I didn't, and I went back and put it on. Hopefully you already put it on because I'm going to put this ahead of this part in the video. But if you forgot or you didn't see mine on so you didn't do it, make sure you go back and add those two pieces. That way you have a really nice stable front that's not going to be smushing all over the place when we put it with the gusset and not a very stable bag. Okay, this is the interior pocket, and it's a pretty simple one. All we're going to do is, here's my wrong side, and here's my right side. We're going to put them right sides together. And pin or clip along the edges. And then we're just going to leave a gap. And then we'll just leave a gap right here. So you're going to sew from here to here and backstitch, and then from here to here and backstitch, and then we'll turn it through the gap. Okay, once you have that sewn, we're going to trim the seam allowances down by about half and clip into the corners. Don't trim right here where the gap is. Okay, now we'll turn it right side out through the gap, and we're going to press out our corners nicely. You can use a chopstick or another blunt object. You can use an awl or a pin or something like that to also get into these corners and gently, carefully pull them out so that you do not put a hole in your fabric or rip your stitches. Once you have all your corners nicely pressed out, you're going to go and press it really well from both sides, and on the gap we're going to push that in the same as our seam allowance, 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. So just make sure each side of the gap is pressed in that amount, and then you'll press that flat closed. Okay, once you have it all nicely pressed with your iron, and here's the gap at the bottom, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch along the top edge about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And it should look like this. And then we'll grab our back main lining, and you should have the area where the pocket markings are already marked. And if you haven't, go back and mark that. And then we're just going to go ahead and place our sewn pocket right sides up in the pocket marking area. Get nice and centered and as straight as you can. And then we will pin it into place so that we can sew it onto the lining. I'm actually going to put one right here in the center first, just to keep that where I want it. Once you have that pinned on how you like, you can go ahead and come over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch down and across and back up, and that will close that gap that's at the bottom. If on the top you'd like to keep those extra secure, you can do a little diagonal stitch across each corner like this, or if you prefer, you can just back stitch really well on both sides. Okay, now grab your back main panel and then your lining panel, and that's the one we just sewed with the pocket. And you can decide if you want the diamonds to be one way or the other. I want mine to be diamonds and not squares, so I'm making sure that the top is the top. And we're going to place those two pieces wrong sides together so that we can see the right side on both outer edges when we flip it back and forth. And then you can clip that into place, matching up your quarter points. And then we'll baste all the way around that. With the other two linings, we're going to put them wrong sides together. And then you can quickly clip them into place. Then you're going to baste all the way around the circle. And then this will go on the back side of your AB piece. Mine's already on there, but if you were going to put it on there, you would put it right here on the back side of your AB piece, like this, and then baste all the way around the circle. And that way, when we open the pocket from the right side, and then when we look into it from the wrong side, you'll see the correct side of the fabric. As I baste these on, I'm using about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's why it's easy for me to use it with the foot, and then you're not having your stitches be showing later. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is work on the piping. And I have cording here. If you have not done piping before, I recommend doing cording that's a bit thinner than what I'm using, but this is what I had. So what you can do is lay it on the bag to measure about how much cording you'll need to go around. I like to do a little bit more just so I have some to work with, and in case it frays or anything, I don't have to worry about that. So you can get just a basic idea of how long it is, and then you'll need to cut 2 cording lengths, for the front and for the back. If you'd like, and you have cording that is synthetic, you can use a lighter and, use it on the end so it doesn't fray, or you can use some fray check. Okay, so what you'll need for this next part is just a little piece of paper, a pen, some pins, and your cording. All you're going to do is just lay the cording in the paper and snugly fit the paper over the cording like this. And then you can pin it into place. And then once you have that really nicely snugged up to it, you can grab your pen and just draw in the little crease that creates. You can do this on both sides. Okay, just like that. And then go ahead and unpin it. And what you'll have is the width that your cording takes up. So we're just going to measure that. So on mine, and so the reason that you do this is because it's really going to vary for anybody, because your cording is going to be different. So mine, gosh, it's kind of a weird one, right? Because it's in between my two, so I've got like a 1/16 in there. So it's close to 3/4, just shy of 3/4 on mine. And so you're going to have this width plus a seam allowance on both sides. So I'm going to say a scant 3/4 for mine. Might be easier to measure it in centimeters for you metric peeps. And then on these other edges, you're going to add your seam allowance. So that's 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. So I'm going to measure out. These clear rulers are really nice because I can see the line underneath. And on the other side. that will be your seam allowance. And then measure the full width of that. Okay, I got 1.5. So my piping needs to be 1.5 inches wide. You'll need to do the same for your piping and find out how big your piece needs to be. So I'm going to cut a piece of vinyl for my piping, and you don't actually need to cut it on the bias because it does have just a little bit of stretch across the width. And so I'm going to use that and just cut it straight along the edge here. The same length as the piping that I measured after going around the circle and the width that we got here. So I'm going to cut 2 of those pieces with those measurements, and then we'll go and sew up the piping. Okay, after you have your strips cut, you're going to turn them to the wrong side, and we're going to sandwich the piping inside it. Fold it over like this. And then we're going to go stitch it in the sewing machine. We're not going to go right as close as we can to the piping. We're going to back off just a little bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch or so, just so that we don't get so close that we see our stitches when we actually add this to the bag. Right now, we're just going to baste it. So you can use a long basting stitch. And like I said, don't snug it up all the way. Just back off just a little bit right here as you stitch this and baste it closed. Okay. In order to get close to the piping like this, you either need to use a piping foot or a zipper foot or a very narrow foot. So you might need to switch your feet out before you do this. I do have a piping foot on, but I've also sewn this with a zipper foot. So whatever you have is fine. If you do choose to use the piping foot, you'll kind of have to push it over just a little bit to get that wider stitch. And you can kind of push the foot into the piping here at the beginning to make sure that it's exactly where you want it to be. Okay, once you have both of those stitched, you can start putting them on our front and back panels. So the one thing I did want to mention though is that if you have pre-made piping, you probably already have your edges serrated, but if you don't, since we're going around a circle, we can do some little snips into the seam allowance, and that will help with going around that circle and making sure that the the piping doesn't like bunch up as we go around that curve. Okay, now find the top of your bag. So my pocket opening is here. So you can start laying the piping along this area here. On one side of my bag, I left this open just a little bit. So I'm going to start there, and we're going to align it right sides together with the bag here. And so we want to have just that raw edge matched up with the raw edge here, and we're going to clip it all the way around this circle. Okay, you can see that my piping and cording are too long, but better too long than too short. So when we come to the end here, I'm going to trim this just a little bit so that it's a little easier to work with. Okay, here at the end, it doesn't really matter if you overlap the beginning over the end or the end over the beginning. But basically what we want to do is we want to make sure that our piping is not overlapping. See how I have 2 layers of piping? So I'm going to pick a couple stitches so I can get into the piping there at the very end. And the same on this side. I want to make sure that that's a little bit open, and that way we can trim after these, we know that they're not overlapping. So actually I'm going to go like this and then like that. And I know that I need to trim it up to about right here. And we need to trim that just a little bit more. Okay, so now what you want to do is on this end part, you can fold it in about 1/2 inch. And then we're going to have this part be, I'm going to clip that into place so it doesn't move around on me. And then after you have this folded the wrong side about 1/2 inch, we're going to layer that over here. Now this is a little bit long. It doesn't need to be quite that long here at the end. So I'm going to trim that up just a little bit more. Don't take too much off. And then we'll just have this come over the top of that so that it looks nice and finished right there on that end. I'm going to trim up just a little bit on this corner right here and here so that there's a tiny bit less bulk when that comes around. Like that, and then you'll just kind of seat it the best you can, and so when you sew it around, you'll have a nicely finished edge right there. And then once you have that all pinned or clipped on really nicely, we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew as close as we can to the piping now. So if you have a piping foot, you can use that and actually get in there really nicely. And if you have just a zipper foot, just butt it up right against the piping the best you can with that 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then we'll do the same thing for the front of the bag with the other piece of piping and sew it all the way around. Remember on this piece that it's not straight across the bottom. We need to tip the whole thing to where the top is the top. So here's my top right here. And here's my bottom. So when you're laying the piping on this one, you can take this just past that bottom mark like this, kind of overlap it a little bit. And then you can clip it into place all the way around. I am like slightly pulling on the piping as I go, just kind of giving it a slight bit of tension as I go around and letting those cut edges kind of fan out just a little bit. Compared to the last step, this one's pretty easy, so let's move on and do this one. All we're going to do is take our 2 main top gusset pieces and we're going to lay those right sides together with the zipper. My zipper's cut just a little bit longer than the gusset, and I just plan on trimming that afterwards so that it's easier to get the pull on. Okay, once you have that clipped into place, you can choose to baste it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all along here. Now we're going to grab one of our top lining gusset pieces and we're going to put that right sides together with the main, but on the back side of the zipper so that the zipper is sandwiched in between. That's not a clip. And just make sure the short ends of your main and lighting pieces are matched up. And then go ahead and stitch with a 3/8 or 1 centimeter seam allowance all along here so that we're getting all 3 layers in there. Okay, once you have the lining sewn in to the main right sides together with the zipper sandwiched in between, we can pull both of those pieces we just sewed out of the way and clip them into place. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So you're going to lay the main right sides together with the zipper. Make sure you match the ends here with the previous main that you just sewed. And then you can baste that into place. Once you have that basted into place, we are going to grab the other top gusset lining and lay it right sides together with the piece that you just sewed, but with the zipper sandwiched in between. And make sure again that you line up the main and lining on both sides. Okay, once you have that clipped on, you can go ahead and go back and sew this with a 2.5 millimeter stitch length, your regular stitch length at 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then we'll have a little gusset. Once you've got that sewn into place, you should have your 2 main top gussets on the right side of the zipper and your 2 linings on the wrong side. We're going to go and press or roll both sides of the gussets away from the zipper. So if you're using vinyl and nylon coil like I am, I'm just going to roll it from this side. And then on the lining side, you could put your iron in there, or you can just do the same thing and roll that really nicely. And then after you have both sides pressed away from the zipper very well, we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper on both sides. Okay, I'm back to using my Teflon rolling foot. You can use a walking foot or Teflon foot. And I'm going to increase my stitch length back to 3.5 for top stitching. And then I've got a mark here on my foot. As I go along, I'm going to make sure that the lining here is pulled away from the zipper so it doesn't bunch up underneath. Now you can go ahead and add your pull to the zipper. It doesn't matter which way you put the pull on right now because you can face it either way when you put this on the bottom gusset. Just make sure that, you know, your tape's pretty even and these end up even. And just like that. Okay, on to the hidden strap connectors. Now, if you've never done this type before, it's actually kind of cool. They're a tiny bit harder, but they're not too difficult. So you should have 2 pieces. One is the strap connector piece and one is the facing for the strap connector. So we're going to put the facing aside for now. And this one for your regular strap connector piece should have a piece of Decovil right here, keeping clear of the seam allowances. And what we're going to do is draw a line down the center. The piece is 2 inches wide. This is a 2-inch ruler, so I'm going to just line this up right here on the 1-inch line of the ruler along the edge of the piece, and that way I can draw a line right down the center. Next, we're going to fold each of these pieces to the raw edge, the long raw edge, to that center line. You can, if you like, put some tape right here along both sides, or you can choose to just fold it in like this and then clip it into place. And now we're going to cut this long piece into 2 equal pieces so that we have 2 strap connector pieces. So it should be 6 inches long. And so you can put a ruler at 3 inches. And I'm just going to make a little marking here. And then we're going to cut down that line so that we have 2 strap connectors. Just like that. Okay, I've brought you over to my cutting table because we're going to make a little cut here in a minute. This is the bottom main gusset, and I've put it on the wrong side here. And we are going to use our ruler to find 1 inch below one of the short ends. And I'll actually pop that this way, then make a mark. So I'm going to line 1 inch all along this edge. As long as I don't move it. Okay, and then we're going to find the center of that. So this piece is 3 3/4 inch long. So you could find the half of that, but what is a little bit easier to maybe think about is that this piece in the middle of Decovil is 3 inches because you have 3/8 on this side and 3/8 on this side, and the width in the center of how big these will actually be for the gusset is 3 inches. So I'm going to lay my ruler right there across the inner facing, and I know that half of 3 is 1.5, so I'm going to mark right there at the 1.5 line, and that's our center. And then, I know this gets a little tricky, we need to make a 1 inch line right across this line. That's where we're going to cut. So I'm going to lay my ruler with the 1/2 inch line right on that center line that I just made. And actually, I have another color pen. You can really use anything because this isn't going to show up. So I'll use blue, and that way we can mark. So we have from this side to this side, that will be our 1 inch mark. So right here in the center, we're going to cut a slit right across this mark that we just made. Okay, I have an X-Acto knife. It's not the best, but it works for this. So all you need to do is just cut right down that 1 inch line. So you have like 1 inch from here, and then we have our 1 inch that we're going to cut out, right? So we're going to cut from here. And you want to be pretty precise about this, because if we're not, our 1 inch piece that we just made won't fit through this hole. So I'm going to just get in there, come back this way so I don't overshoot the line. Okay, now you've got your 1 inch and 1 inch marking there. Now we're going to do the whole strap connector business, but if you want to speed up this process, you can do the exact same thing on the other side, because what's going to happen is this will go around the bottom of our bag, and this is where the strap connector will come out. So I'm going to quickly make the same markings we did here on this side and cut that 1 inch hole, and then we'll move on. That way we don't have to come back and do this same process again. Okay, now here's that connector facing piece that we had. I did just add a light SF101 interfacing on mine. I don't want it to be too thick because it's just the facing. And we're going to do the same sort of thing as the first one, except we don't have to do any folding. We're just going to cut it. So you can, on the back, oh, don't even need that because I'm on here, huh? So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yep, 6 inches. And we'll cut that right at 3. So that we have 2 connector pieces, 1 for each side of the gusset. So we're just going to grab one of them for now, and we'll flip the gusset over to the right side. We're going to insert the facing piece right sides together with the bottom gusset piece through the slit that we made. And here's the moment of truth. Did I make it wide enough to fit this piece into there, or do we need to widen it? Okay, I think it is wide enough on some of the layers, but not all the way through. So I'm just gonna make sure that it's wide enough all the way through all of our layers. Okay, I have cut that a little bit further, so let's try again. Should fit this time. And if you have the same issue, you can do the same with yours. Just make sure it fits. This facing piece should also be 1 inch. So if you have any cutting errors, it won't fit. So, yeah, mine's just a tiny bit bigger. So I'm going to trim off just a tiny little bit, not too much, or I'll have to recut the whole piece. And one more try. Okay, right sides together into the facing hole. Yay, it fits. Okay, on this side, we're just gonna pull it through just a little bit. We just want it sticking out. We only want that to stick out a 1/4 inch beyond the slit. So a 1/4 inch is not very much. So just like that. Okay, and then I have a couple bait clips I'm gonna pop in there to make sure that mine doesn't move. Now we're gonna flip this back over to the main side of the gusset, and we're going to stitch right here, super close to that edge. We don't want to go beyond on this side or beyond on this side. We just want to stitch right here all along. And when you get to this point where you're starting and you're ending and back stitching, use the hand crank on your sewing machine to do that part. Yep. So it should look like this. Okay, after you have that stitched, we're gonna take the top of this, find the little gap, and stuff the end of it through the gap. And this part on the top should kind of raise up into place. And then we can pin or clip. I'd say clip would be the best thing. This to the top so it stays out of the way. And now you're going to take that folded piece that you already made and cut in half. And we're going to slide it with the folded part visible up through that hole. And you only want this up through the hole a 1/4 inch on this other side. So yeah, I have mine stuffed in too far. So we're going to come back a bit. Yep, to about like that. And then on this side, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the facing. We're going to sew super close to the slit that we made. But this time we're going to sew it on this piece. So you'll just sew like right here across, all the way across, and just don't sew onto the gusset at all. That's not marking, but you can see what I'm doing, right? We're going to sew right there. Okay, next we're going to grab one of our 1-inch D-rings and we're going to slide it onto this piece. And then we're going to take this connector piece and push it back up through the slit again. I kind of wish I had taped mine. I think on the next one I'm going to go ahead and tape it just so it's not wiggling around on me there. And you're just gonna pull it through the hole like here until you get the D-ring into a spot that you like. We don't want, I'm gonna see, I should have taped it. Maybe you taped it and you're smarter than me, and then you're not gonna have this problem, but I'm gonna have to like push all these things in. Yeah, that looks better. So we don't want our D-ring to be like stuck into place. Like if you pull too hard, it's gonna be like boop and stick out. So don't pull so hard that it sticks out, just so that it can be like loose and sit where it needs to be. And then that's our D-ring, and the only thing we have to do now is just secure it on the other side. So I'm gonna undo these clips on the facing. And then we can clip these two together. How nice is that looking? How fun. Okay, so on this back side, we're not gonna trim anything yet. We're just going to have all these three pieces together. And you have two options of how you wanna secure this. One, you can add a rivet about 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch below this seam right here. So you'll pop it in like right there. Or if you don't have rivets or don't wanna do that, you can add stitching lines. So you can do a square and then put an X in it. And then after you've done the securing, then you can trim this piece up to that point. So I'm gonna go add a rivet right there. Okay, once you've either got your rivet in or you've done your stitched line where you do a square with an X, you can trim off the excess below it. I like to make it kind of look like a square. So, and then you'll repeat that on the other side, and you will have two of these connectors. So now you want to take your bottom gusset with the connectors already in, and you're going to have your top assembled gusset, flip it right sides together with the bottom gusset, and we're going to pin or clip into place. And you can go ahead and do it on the other side too. Okay, now you have the option to baste both of these sides at 1/4 inch right now. Now you're going to clip the lining to the main. So we're going to have, this is the lining bottom gusset to the main bottom gusset, and everything is sandwiched in between. So we can have this lined up. And the same thing right here on this side. And then go ahead and sew along both of these short sides, this time with the regular seam allowance 3/8 inch. Okay, and then just turn it right side out. Okay, you should now have your seam allowances covered up, and we're going to press that seam allowance toward the bottom gusset here, and then we'll top stitch along right 1/8 of an inch from the seam here on the bottom gusset on both sides. Okay, next, if you have any jogs like this, like I do, you can go ahead and trim them up. Okay, and then we're going to go around the entire bag on both sides and baste the main gusset to the lining gusset so that these aren't flopping apart. Just right there all along. Next, we're going to quarter the gusset. So to do that, we're just going to match those seams like this. And I like to clip them into place so that they do not move. And then where the fabric folds here at the end is where your quarter points are. And you can mark them with whatever you'd like. I like to do just some tiny little snips right there, and make sure you do it on both sides. And then also on the opposite side of the seam, mark those quarters. And then you're going to match up the quartered points you just made. And you can clip those into place. And then the ends where it folds again is your opposite quarter point. So go ahead and snip in or mark those how you like. Okay, and then we're just going to match up this gusset to the panels. I'm going to start with the back panel. You just want to find the top and find the gusset quarter point that comes at the top, and we're going to line those up right sides together. Now this is the time where you decide if you want your zipper to open to the right or to the left. I'm going to have it open to the right, so I'm going to go ahead and match up that quarter point like this. And then do the same for all 4 quarter points around the circle. And you can see that this clip already popped out, and for that reason, I'm going to go around, and you can either staple or baste each of these quarter points. For this bag, I recommend stapling if you've got it. Otherwise, baste them really good with the sewing machine. But it's going to be a tough bag to go around. So stapling is better. Okay, so what you do with the stapler is, of course, staple the quarter points, but more specifically, you want to keep, that's going to be the hardest one to start with. Let's show you an easier one. You want to keep the staples out of the part where you're going to sew it. So you need to have it about a 1/4 inch in from the edge. And sometimes it's helpful to clip on either side of where you're going to staple before you staple, so that it doesn't move while you're stapling. And you know, they do make better staplers than what I have. I just have your regular old paper stapler, and it works okay, but they do make better ones. So I'm going to put one there and one here at the top. Okay, once you have all of those stapled or basted, you can continue to add some clips or pins in between each one. If you feel like you want to put a couple more staples, you can, but just remember that you're going to have to take them all out, you know, at the end. So that is up to you. I might add one more in between. Okay, once you have all your clips and or staples and maybe basting points all in there, we are going to take this over to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew this with the gusset on top. And we're going to go all the way around and just try to butt up as close as you can to the piping Right here, as you go around, a pair of hemostats is useful, a stiletto is useful. Go slow and good luck. Okay, once you've gone around, you can flip it right side out and check your work. If there's any parts that you think you need to go back over, you can stick them back onto the machine and go back over them the best you can. Okay, once you're happy with the back, we're going to work on the front. So you can flip the bag wrong sides out again. And then we're going to align the front. It'll be upside down, but we need to make sure that we have that aligned properly so that we have this at an angle in the right way and everything. So your smaller piece is the top and the bigger piece is the bottom. And hopefully you have those quarter points marked already. Mine are hidden here in the seam allowances, but that's my top. So I'm going to align that with the quarter point of the gusset on the top. If you don't do this at an angle, right sides together, you're going to end up with your zipper going a different way than it should. So you can clip that into place and then do the same for the other quarter points. Okay, let's get this bag finished. I have my 4 quarter points marked, and all we need to do is just grab our stapler or baste each of these points and then clip back all the way around and sew it. This part is just a little bit harder because you have more bulk. So when you put it in the machine, you're going to want to sew, if you can, with the gusset side up, and you just kind of smash it in there. If that doesn't work and you just cannot get it under your machine, you can, of course, do it this way. So I'm going to get these stapled and clipped and then sewn all the way around. Okay, once you have that seam sewed, we're going to just double check that all of your seams look good on the inside and just make sure that you don't need to go over anything again. Once you're happy with them, you're going to start looking at the seam allowance on the outside. So we want to trim it up and not go too far into the bag, but we want to trim into the seams just a little bit so that we can bind them. So you can grab your scissors, and basically we're just evening it all out, making it straight. And you can also choose to take a little bit of the bulk out of certain sections, but you do want to keep the seam allowance a little bit so that the binding goes around evenly. So you can choose, see that middle layer there, to kind of trim that out. And then you can also just go around and make everything even. Once you have that trimmed, we're just going to bind the seams. So you have 2 options. One is double fold bias tape. It looks like this. You can make your own or use pre-made. And the other is called fold over elastic, also known as FOE. And it's stretchy, and there's just like a little sort of indent sort of seam area down the middle. So I will show you both ways, and then you can choose which one you like. For the bias binding, all you're going to do is just open it up, and I'm actually we have a nice little seam right here, and that's gonna make it more difficult because we're already bulking up the end. So you're gonna fold it out like this, and then we're gonna fold this short end a 1/2 inch to the wrong side. And we're gonna put that on the seam. Now on some of these bias bindings, there's a narrower side, this side or this side. Is actually this one. So I'm going to pop that on that side because we want to sew around that narrow side first so that when we flip it, we catch the opposite side. So you can go ahead and clip that into place. If you want to clip all along like this, you can. Or you can just, as you sew it, you're going to kind of pull it along. Since we're going around a curve, you're going to want to stretch. It has just a tiny bit of give. Kind of stretch it as you go all the way around. And then when you get back to the end, you're going to trim it. I'm not going to trim mine because I'm going to use the FOE here in a minute too. But pretend you went all the way around and you have your length. And here's the end where you've trimmed it. You can just lay it into that area here. And when we fold it over, you'll have no raw edges showing because you folded this beginning part. So all you'll do is just sew in that crease all the way around, trim it, overlap it, and then after it's sewn, you're going to fold it in and then fold it again and get it sandwiched really nicely around your seam allowance all the way around. And then you just sew again, and then you'll have got that all the way in. So make sure it's really nicely folded on the back side and the front before you sew all the way back around. And then that's how you do the bias binding. Okay, our other option is fold over elastic. And for that, you simply just sandwich it on the seam. So you just start, and sometimes they have a shiny side and a matte side. You can put it whichever way you like, but you're just going to sandwich it around the seam. And as you go around, you're going to stretch it just a little bit so that it kind of hugs that seam. And you don't have to pin it all on at the beginning like this. You can if you want, or you can just, as you sew it, pull it like this. Because when you get to the end, you might find that you have a different amount than you thought you needed because you stretched it and got it really nicely snug. Once you come back around to the beginning, if you have a long piece, you're going to trim it, and then you can fold it in like this and sandwich it around the start point, and that way you won't have any raw edges. And so you're not going to do any first sewing and second sewing. You're just going to make sure it's really nicely sandwiched so that when you sew, you catch both sides and go all the way around on both seam allowances on this side, and then you're done. Okay, we're all finished. How'd you do? How did your bag turn out? And do you have any questions for me? Let me know in the comments and we'll try to get those answered as soon as we can. Also, if you have any recommendations for patterns that you want to see from Ellie and Mac, and then we come and sew them up for you on the video tutorials, please let us know that in the comments. Also, be sure to like and follow, and stay tuned for more great videos from Ellie and Mac.